Okay.
You saw it the other day.
Okay,
Okay.
well, we don't have a big attendance, but we'll get going here. All right. When Nick talked me into this, I thought about the fly tying classes that I've taught, which has been a fair number of them over the years, but for Orvis and for Trout Unlimited, and then for BC Fly Fishers. And I thought about some of the common things that I used to see when people were starting out, and thought we would talk about some of those. But then I thought, since it's a beginning class, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the tools and what you really need and what you really don't need, and what you can get away with, which might be particularly good for Brian if he's thinking about starting out. So let me just start with the most common thing that you'd need if you were gonna tie flies, and that's the vise. You can buy a vise for as little as $18. And be honest with you, if you're a starting out tyer, unless you know you're really going to get into it, I can't really think of any reason why you need a vise more than 18 bucks. I mean, it's nice to spend a $500, but it's not that nice in my mind, to spend $500 and buy a Renzetti or something, but the flies come out the same no matter what. And in fact, once upon a time, I was stuck in a place and I ran out of flies, and I went over to Walmart and I bought a 98-cent C-clamp, and I turned a chair in the hotel room upside down, and I used the chair and the C-clamp in order to clamp the flies, and I tied a whole bunch of flies and then went out and caught fish with them. So, and then not only that, but being a cheap bastard, I took the 99-cent clamp back to Walmart and got my money back. So, nothing more than a clamp. There's two kinds of vices, and I'm going to share the screen to show some pictures here. This one here that you see is the most basic one. They're fairly common. That's the kind that we do have some for class. They sell for $18, and at least that's one that I just pulled up on. Let me just think here. Let me move this for a second so I can. That comes from the Fly Shack, and oh, sorry, I'm wrong. It's $15, and it's okay. It is a clamp-on vise. You see down here on the bottom, it clamps onto your table. That makes for a stable platform, but you have to be careful to make sure you have a table that it will clamp onto. And if you're going in different places, you may end up someplace where you can't clamp it onto something. A common fix you see is somebody then brings a board and two C-clamps, with big throats that they clamp onto something and clamp the vise onto the board. But the other option is a pedestal vise like that, which is actually what I'm going to be tying on tonight, which has a heavy metal base. You can pick it up and move it around. It's freestanding. You can sit it anywhere. That's okay. This vise is probably about, I don't know, about $130. But there's really no reason it doesn't tie a fly one bit better than that $15 vise. It happens to be a rotary vise. By that you can see that there's a little crank here, and you can rotate this head around. When we switch over to the fly view, I'll show you that you can rotate. It's handy for winding chenille and winding hackle and stuff like that. And I use it. I don't use it extensively, but sometimes when you're going to do a lot of it, it is a handy thing to have. They tend to cost a little bit more. One thing that I want you to keep in mind is that whenever you tie and you run your hand around the hook with putting thread on, you're actually putting one twist in the thread. And so if you're a right-handed tyer, which will tie in a clockwise fashion while looking at the eye of the fly, if you were standing perpendicular to the vise, you're basically putting one twist every time you do that. That's kind of important to think about. Rotary gets around that problem, if you consider it a problem or you don't compensate for it, because there is no twist. The vise itself goes around and you're just wrapping it on like you're winding it on a cylinder. So there's the vices, and here's a cute vise that I bought When I bought it, it was about $21. I see it's 41 now. This is a little tiny portable vise, and it fits in that little bag. And the next thing I'm going to show you is a little fly tying kit, which has all the tools you need for travel. And I have this little tiny bag that holds both this vise and the whole toolkit, so that you can travel off someplace and tie what you want. Maybe back in the hotel room, but you don't have some big honking heavy thing with you. It is a clamp on, however. So that's kind of neat to have. Let me just see if there's anything else. Oh yeah, then I wanted to show you the toolkit. I've also bought this. Somebody in the last fly tying class I did had this kit. It's now being sold for $30. And it has virtually almost all the tools you'd ever want, maybe even some you might not use.
Angelica.
Yeah, she bought it, and I thought it was so cool, especially since I found out that usually when you have this kind of thing, the scissors in them are crap, but these scissors work very well. And so I bought that little kit, and believe it or not, that little fold-up kit fits beautifully in that sack along with that vise. So I have this little bundle that's about 4 inches by 2.5 inches by about 8 inches that holds my vise and a complete set of tools. And we'll kind of quickly run through those tools. This right here can you guys see the mouse wiggling around there? You see the mouse right next to the bodkin?
Yeah, it's okay.
Can you see the
it all.
mouse?
We can
Yes.
see it all the time.
You can't see it?
No, we can see it. It's
Okay.
fine.
Well, that's a bodkin, and it's nothing more than a needle. I'll be honest with you, I have some old hat pins, which I sometimes use when I can't find my bodkin. They're handy for cleaning out hook eyes. They're handy for picking out dubbing, things like that. You can use a pin. The next thing is a whip finish tool, which is actually pretty handy. Many people learn to hand whip finish, and I can do it just fine, but I use the whip finish tool all the time. It basically ties a multi-turn whip finish and traps the thread inside. And it's it's virtually always used to finish off your fly. When you get to the end and you're all done, you can't just cut your thread. You have to tie it on somehow and secure it to keep it from unwinding. The very next thing is a threader, which is used. This end collapses and it sticks up in through this next tool, which is the bobbin that will hold your thread. And you stick it up through so that it sticks out in here. The thread is clamped between the two black prongs. They spread out and hold the thread roll, and you stick the piece of thread through the bodkin and yank it, and it pulls the thread out through. I have no use for those. I've never used it. Never use them. I basically feed the thread manually into the end and put the end of the bobbin in my mouth and give it a suck, and very quickly usually suck your thread right through. This is one kind of a hackle plier, which is used for short pieces of material that you're going to wrap around a hook, especially a hackle. You clamp the hackle in this part of the clamp, and then you put your finger through it down here and you rotate it around your fly, and that allows you to wrap without twisting, because you do not want to twist a hackle as you wrap it. This is a hackle stacker, which most people won't use. You might use them for some flies. It's kind of optional. It's usually used on deer hair, sometimes on anything that's stiff hair that you've cut off the hide and you're trying to align the tips, the far tips, the pointy tips, the ends. Obviously, these are scissors, and it's really important to have decent scissors. Although the ones in the kit are fine, I have several other pair. I kind of use them indiscriminately. And I've added to the kit, for my kit, I've added, let me change screens and go to a different setup right here for you. Hang on. Let me figure out how to do that. Heck, do I get rid of this? What the heck? I can't seem to get it maximized again.
What are you trying to do?
Oh, sure. Okay, here we go.
Share.
Okay, now, share screen, advanced, boom. Okay. All right. Hopefully you guys see a hook and a vise. Do you?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. The tools that I added are a different kind of hack. Well, they sell them as hackle pliers. It's basically actually a tool that was used by electrical engineers to do electrical connections to cables. And you can, let me see if I can get it somewhere. And you clamp the material in that little end that sticks out there and then go around with it. The problem with it is that if you hold it stationary in your hand, every time you go around, you put a twist in something. The traditional hackle plier doesn't put the twist in. So it's useful, but you do need to be careful how you use it. Let me see. The other tool that I added, which frankly I think is absolutely vital to the kit, is a good old fashioned cheap, you can buy them in the dollar store for $1, set of, well, these are fingernail clippers, but I actually prefer the toenail clippers. You can't buy those for $1. And you buy a good quality one, largely because you never want to cut wire and nasty materials with your scissors. If you got good scissors, you're going to pay probably at least $18 for them if you're buying them separately. And it's real easy to ruin them. And even the toenail clippers, which I use all the time, these are the larger toenail clippers. You know, they last me about 2 years. These are the brand is actually Trim, and they're like $2.50. And actually, that's exactly the same thing that I carry on a lanyard when I'm fishing to cut my leader, trim my knots, and do everything else. I do it all with that. So let me look and see here what I got next. Then there's some other tools that are useful. Some of them much more so. One, diagonal pliers. Doesn't have to be a big honking pair, a relatively small pair, like that. I have them around because I periodically use them to cut heavier wire. And if you're making an articulated fly, which we're really not going to talk about, but that's a shank with a joint connected to another fly. Usually you tie it on 2 hooks, but you usually cut one of the hooks off. It's very common to, after you've tied it, to cut the front hook off. And that being the case, you need something that's capable of cutting that hook off, because these hooks can be pretty tough. You're not going to do it with a pair of fingernail clippers. Smooth jaw pliers. I have a pair of needle nose pliers, and they're smooth inside. They have no, a lot of tires have a kind of a linear knurling or a diamond knurling on the inside. You want the kind that have flat. They're great for, you'll find things that you need to do with them. Like sometimes you have a difficult feather that you're going to tie down, and you can squeeze the central core of the feather to make it flat, to get it to lay in position. Another thing that it's particularly good for is if you want to crush the barb on a hook. They're very good for that. You can also use your vise to do that, but I tend to use the pliers. I told you about the toenail trimmers. Half hitch tool. A half hitch tool is basically nothing more than really they come in sizes. You can get a set of them if I can get this in the right position. They're just a piece of tubing or a solid piece of rod with a cone on the end of it and a hole in it, and it will fit it will fit over, if you get the right size, this isn't the right size, this one is. You get the right size, it will just, yeah, I'm making a liar. Oh, this is a really big hook, but it generally will fit over the end of the eye. And when you're doing half hitch, which I'll show later, you wrap the thread around it and stick it over and pull it on. They're particularly useful. They're particularly useful for tying dry flies because the hooks get very small and the hackle gets in the way, and they come in sizes. The two that I just picked up are fairly large, but I have these which go all the way down to probably a 20. Tweezers. I personally find tweezers very useful, but not just the regular tweezers. These are the technical tweezers with a little hook on them. I find it most useful. I oftentimes wrap lead or non-toxic wire on the shank of my hook to add weight if it's going to be a weighted fly, and trying to bring down the end of that and get it to lay in place is a problem, and these work very well for doing that. You can kind of wrap it around it and just kind of rotate it down and put it in place. They're also good for tucking, and you'll see me use it for tucking lead into the bead to center it. There are other kinds. I don't use them, but other people do for picking up beads. They make pliers that have sort of two round discs on the end of it that allow you to pick up beads if you have trouble. Some people have trouble picking up the small beads and then orienting them and putting them on the hook if you've got a beaded hook. And I've seen people use those. I don't have that problem, so I don't happen to do that. Dubbing twister. We're not going to cover dubbing in this particular lesson, but a dubbing twister is, when I find one, is a tool that, where the heck is it? I had one laying here. It's a tool that just allows you to twist the thread when you stick material in it. I can't find an example of it right now because my table is covered with stuff. It's probably hidden in plain sight. However, you don't really need one. For classes, we do dubbing, and I oftentimes pass out the really technical tool made out of a bent, straightened paper clip. And you basically hook your thread in the end of it and you just twist it around, and guess what? It twists the loop. So you don't really need one, but they are handy. I don't think I can show this, but a portable vacuum cleaner, the kind that sucks up the mess when you're finished, is kind of handy. Reading glasses, if you have trouble working up close, then a pair of the cheap dollar store reading glasses, if you need to get real close, and for those people that wear glasses, you should be aware, you can put them on right over your glasses and they will add to what you already have. So oftentimes when I'm doing a lot of tying, I will put them on and look through the lower part of my bifocals, which is already reading. And you can actually see, I got them stuck on my face now, and they work fine. It's just that I have to get close to the work. So that's something that can be handy. And I was trying to show the vacuum. There's what I'm talking about, that kind of thing. That one there is about $35. It's rechargeable. And some kind of a lamp to illuminate your work. You really do need that. You'd be surprised how poorly how your eyes tire if you don't have good light on your fly. I'll move on to glues because you're going to need something at some point. What I used to use head cement. There's two kinds. There's a water-based, and then there's one that's got some volatile in it. It's not alcohol, but I don't know what it is. But it's I haven't used those in a long time. They're hard to keep around. At least the volatile one is, because even when the bottle's sealed, it leaks out. Another thing you can use is you can go to any place and buy Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails. This is quite good stuff. I use it a lot. It can be good for bonding things to your hook. It can be good for finishing off, but mostly I use it if I'm tying a streamer bait fish that has a big black shaped head, and you can put this on over everything else and it makes it very shiny. You can also use a UV cure, which I'm not going to talk about. And mostly what I use to seal my knots is super glue. And here's two common kinds. This is Loctite. These are, I don't know, $3.50 a bottle. This is the stuff I buy at Dollar Tree. You get 2 bottles for $1. And they also have 2 tubes of gel for $1. I don't use the gel very often. It doesn't keep well. Once you've opened it, it kind of locks up. The gel is good for like putting on eyes. It's just basically a much more viscous thing. The one thing that I would definitely warn somebody about is never, ever try to dispense directly out of the bottle onto your fly. You can't believe how the low viscosity cyanoacrylate superglues, they just wet the surface and suck up into the fibers so that your fly will become hard like a bullet. So I think what I'll do is I'll move on to tips, especially for basic for beginners. Putting your hook in the vise. Don't put it in like this, okay? And you don't want to put it up here because it's going to be a problem. You want to kind of get right down in the core, about like that. And you want to make sure after you put that in your vise, because vices are adjustable for different diameter hooks, the clamp is adjustable. You want to be able to do that without having the hook move around. For example, if this hook were too loose, and I tried to do that, it's still not too loose. No, we're still okay. If you can do that, you're not going to be able to tie the fly. So you have to make sure that you've got it set in a manner that's going to stay put. Okay, you should be able to do that without having any rotation down there in the fly. Starting the thread. This is one that's interesting because everybody always feels like, well, how hard could it be to start thread on a hook? Well, you'd be surprised. In many of the classes I've taught, people have trouble doing it. And the real trick to it here is to start. Let me shed just a little more light on it. I'm going to exaggerate, but you're going to wind up the hook a couple of turns, and then keep it, change the orientation and wind back over that. And that winding locks the material onto the hook. Now, it doesn't lock it real tight, but it's under its own weight, it stays put. If I don't loosen it, you can see I can actually bend that hook, so I'm now hooked on. But if I let that go loose, you know, if I don't wind uniformly, that whole thing comes undone. This is what you see right here is what I commonly see when people try to start. And it's frustrating in a class because then everybody gets ahead of them. So it's pretty intuitive once you've seen it. You just wind up a couple of turns and then back down over it until it locks it in place. When you're wrapping thread, another thing I see, people go up and then they go slack and they go down, and then they go slack and they go up. And you can actually see what's happening to nothing stays put. Any material you put on there falls off. You have to hold your vise horizontal and go around the hook. While if you could see this on end, you'd see that the end of the hook is going around in a circle as I wind. You basically keep tension all the time, not part of the term and then go loose. You don't ever want to go loose. You need to go. That's very common, and it's just a matter of learning to do that.
John, how are you holding the bobbin?
How am I holding the bobbin?
Yeah,
I,
show that.
let me show that this way. I basically have the bobbin, I'm holding it like this, and I can control the tension. These two spring arms go into the ends of it, but by controlling how hard I squeeze, I can create it tight. Usually you set your bobbin for the thread that you're going to use. And you set the bobbin so that it basically will dispense the thread without breaking it. Let me just look and see if I happen to miss the discussion on thread. I did. Let me jump back and talk quickly about thread. Thread comes in a variety of sizes, common, and two different labeling systems. One actually comes out of the medical profession. Many years ago, they used to rate catgut size by O's, zeros, and the smallest catgut would be like 0.000000, and they called it 6.0. A bigger one would have been 0.00, and they called it 3.0. Well, when they started making threads for fly tying, they adopted that system, the first manufacturer to do it. And the more common threads that you see are 8.0, 6.0, and 3.0. The smaller the number, the bigger the thread. When I say bigger, I'm really talking about diameter. And if the materials are the same, that is to say they're all nylon and you're comparing them, the one with the smallest number, for example, 3.0 as opposed to say 8.0, will be not only bigger, it will be stronger, meaning that you can pull a lot harder and not break the thread. The Europeans used a system called denier, and it's a weird thing. It's actually, I'm not sure it comes from the Europeans, but I would guess it does because it's metric. And it is the mass in grams of 9,000 meters of the thread, and that has now become fairly prevalent. And one vendor uses it exclusively. So you'll see 70D or 70 denier. You'll see 140, 210. It's twice 70, 3 times 70. The larger the number, the bigger and heavier the thread. And although this isn't exactly correct, the 70 denier is kind of like 8.0. The 140 denier is kind of like 6.0, and the 210 denier is like the 3.0. So if you're tying big flies or need to tie a fly that you need a lot of tension, you need to use a strong thread. That mandates a larger number. Also, big flies, bulk isn't so much of a problem. If you're tying tiny flies like size 20s, you're never going to use a big thread because the thread is just way too big. You have to be down, frankly, be down like 12.0 or 16.0. So it's very small stuff. Another reason to use heavy thread on big flies is big flies are oftentimes used to catch big and or toothy fish. And they tend to rip flies up pretty good. So you need some strong thread, because if you break the thread, either getting it out of the fish or the fish's mouth chews it up, the fly has no longevity. And if you put some time into tying the fly, you'd like to at least have it last for a while. Also, skill level comes into play. If you're just starting, then you should probably start with the larger, more stronger threads, because you will have difficulty starting to tie, for example, with 8.0 and maybe even 6.0. And by the difficulty I'm talking about is that as you wind, you'll be breaking the thread often. And that will be very frustrating to you. Until you learn to manage the thread tension while you're winding, you probably want to use the bigger thread. Also, the threads come in kind of two styles depending upon the manufacturer. One that basically looks like it's a single strand. It may contain multiple fibers, but it's made in such a way that it acts like it's a single strand, like almost like a monofilament. The other kind is multi-stranded. The multi-stranded ones, which are, UTC makes one, that all of theirs are multi-stranded. They're many very fine threads in parallel. And depending on if they're twisted up, they're bulk and rounded. If they're untwisted, they lay flat. They have the advantage of being able to be adjusted to make smooth surfaces or to make lumpy surfaces just by how you twist them. And you can also split those to make a dubbing loop by just separating the threads and putting your dubbing in between. We're really not going to talk about that today, but it's something you can do. In order to increase, all of the threads are wound clockwise. The twist in all of the threads are clockwise when the manufacturer makes them. If you want them to be rounder and more monofilament-like, when you're looking at your vise, when you're looking at your vise, you want to spin your, if you're looking down from above, if you spin your bobbin clockwise, looking down on it, it will cord the thread up and make it round and tight. If you spin it the other way, and it's a multi-strand thread, it will untwist it until you just have fine flat strands. And there's going to be some reasons for doing that. One advantage to regardless of what kind it is, when you're tying something onto the top of the thread, tying something onto the top of the hook. Let me just take this little piece of, when I'm tying onto the top of the hook, if I'm corded up really tightly, now you'll see that as I go over here to tighten that on, you see how that thread jumped to the front? It jumped away. I want to wrap it over that. Now, when it's corded up, it doesn't want to lay on top of it. It wants to jump to the right. If I uncord it by winding it strongly counterclockwise and then do it, it will now jump to the rear, jump into my fingers so that I can tie that down. That is something that you will use often. And you'll find that a lot of times when you're tying something onto a fly, the damn thread doesn't want to grab the material or lay onto the material you're trying to tie on. And the way to do that is to spin the bobbin counterclockwise, looking down from above. And when you come up, it will cause the thread to jump towards your fingers. I'm all describing this as if you were a right-handed tire. I suppose it's all backwards if it's a left-handed tire. Now let me go back to, okay, now I was gonna, originally when I jumped to that, I was gonna talk about this. This is called the pinch wrap. And you commonly use this when you want to place oftentimes multiple pieces of material in a location, and you want to keep them on the top. And you wind it up loosely, you let it jump to the rear, you come down, and then you pull down. If you don't do that and you try to tie the material on this way, it will watch, I don't know if you can see that, it's trying to twist it around the hook. And I'm not actually catching it, it's just pushing it around. So this pinch wrap is something that you kind of like need to learn to do. Whip finishing. Hand whip finishing kind of looks like magic. You're down here at the front of the fly now, and you want to tie it off. You suppose we just finished. To do a hand whip finish, I will do it, but it will be hard. It will be hard to follow. And the only thing I can say is that you need to find a video on it and then practice it. But and a lot of people do it, but you will find that using a whip finishing tool, which I'm holding up here, is a good way to go. You catch the thread in that part, you wind it around that part, you lay the thread up against the fly, and then the handle just rotate around. And then when you're finished, you rotate in, pull it off of there, pull it up, off, and you're done. And now you can clip your thread. And that would have tied off the fly. I use it a lot, almost always. The only time that I really don't use it is when I'm tying very tiny flies and the hackle is in the way. When the hackle is in the way and you go around it, you oftentimes catch the hackle fibers. When that condition occurs, you're much better off doing a half hitch finish. And although this isn't quite the right diameter tool, let me see if one of these is larger. This is probably to do a half hitch with the half hitch tool, and I probably can get this to work. Normally you'd go over the eye. You go around the tool. You see if I can get that a little closer so you can see it. You go around the tool, so you have a loop around the tool, and you put the tool on the end and then pull it up. Around the tool and pull it up. And because you're pushing in, when you've got a bunch of hackle fibers hanging off the front, it pushes them back and you get your thread locked in that way, although you need to do a couple of them. You can also do multiple wraps. It's a little hard in this control space for you to see, but I got 2 wraps on there now, and I can bring them both up there so that I have two half hitches there. And then you would cut your thread and put a little bit of glue on it. For gluing, I like cyanoacrylate. However, in order to do it, what I like to do is take this is a can that's like an old Kodak film can. I have a bunch of them, and I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm shaking it. It's got a bunch of, I think it's got a bunch of old dead split shot in it. This, I guess you can't see it. Let me see if I can figure out how you do that. This is what's in it. There's a bunch of split shot in it. And it just gives it a bunch of weight, which makes it very stable. You don't fill it to the top. It's filled about halfway, makes it very stable. And you turn it upside down. On the bottom of it, there's a dimple. I like to take, there's other people have other systems. I like to take my bottle of cyanoacrylate and I like to fill the dimple with a drop or 2 of super glue. And then I just let it sit on the bench. And then when I need it and I got to tie something off, I take my bodkin. Let me grab one. I take the bodkin. Oh, let me go back to the other view. I take the bodkin and I dip it in there and I get a little tiny drop on there. And then I just go like that. And you can dispense a really small micro drop onto it. And that's all it takes to lock that up. And it's basically dry right away. So that's at least the method I use. I learned it from Kurt Nelson. For a long time, I tried using cyanoacrylate and I would try to do it out of the bottle. And so much comes out of the bottle, the drops are so big, they'll suck into your whole fly and ruin it. This way you can get just a micro drop. Okay, when you're tying on, let me remove this and put a different hook in for the moment. I want to show you something. Let me grab another hook.
Ryan, if you have any questions, speak up.
All right. It's the same hook. It's just one that I didn't glue anything onto. And let's suppose that I was tying a fly that had, this is what I'm about to do is very common in nymph tying, okay? And regardless of whether I was tying a nymph that used pheasant tail fibers for the body, which is common, surprisingly, in the pheasant tail, Or maybe I was winding a fly that used peacock curl. In this particular example, I'm gonna tie some, I'm gonna grab some pheasant tail fibers. And anybody who has any experience at wrapping these things knows that oftentimes when you wrap them, I'm going to tie some on now. I'm going to use a pinch to get them on top. So I'm going to bulk my thread, unbulk my thread and make it jump to the rear so that I get them down there. Now, if I were to wind my thread to the front, which most people try to do, because the next place what you're gonna do is you're gonna wrap this around and around and around and around, then you're gonna tie it off up here when it gets there. But many times as you do this wrap, these fibers separate and they don't give you a good wrap. This example, you can maybe see they're separated a little bit. You can see that gap there. Sometimes they separate a lot and one winds ahead of the other. What I'm about to show you doesn't matter whether you're doing this with peacock herl or whether you're doing this with pheasant tail or whether you're doing this with maybe you're going to do a body of a collection of flash materials. If instead of winding your thread to the front, you leave it right there at the back like that, and then when you wind, you just wind right up against the thread. It will keep the bunch together. It will keep them from separating, and you'll end up with a very nice uniform body. Sometimes you get away with it. You can always, even if you don't do this, you can always force it, but many times it's frustrating. And then when you get up to the top, you can tie it off and then cut it off and you're done. So you get a nice smooth tail. If we were tying pheasant tails, this would be the abdomen section of the pheasant tail. Same thing if we were tying a prince nymph. Only thing is we'd be using peacock herl instead. Counter wrapping. Okay, when people tie pheasant tail, I should have done this ahead of time. Let me unwrap that, take it off, and show you. I'm going to wind the pheasant tail clockwise from the end. I'm going to wind it around. If I'm looking at the end of the, I'm going to wind it clockwise. When I wind it clockwise, I mean, I get that nice thing that you just saw, but it's very fragile. The fibers that we use from the pheasant tail are very fragile. So is peacock herl, very fragile. Also, if we were winding hackle, like this, if we were winding hackle, it's very fragile. So if we wind it around something and then we either damage it with our removal tool to get it out of the fish, or the fish's teeth rip it. Once they break either the fibers or the hackle core, the whole damn thing comes unwound and the fly becomes useless. So we protect that by wrapping something over it. The most common thing to use is wire, but you can use, some people use thread, but wire is probably the most common. But the important thing here is just to realize that it needs to be counter wrapped. You can't run if you put wire on it, you can't run the wire in the same direction. Otherwise, there's no protection. So if you think of it as a screw, one is a clockwise wrap and the other one is a counterclockwise wrap. So when you do that wrap, you're going to be putting a wire on, but you're going to put the wire on before you put you can put the hackle on, or you can put I'm going to put some more pheasant tail on, but but the wire goes on before you do the wrapping. So I'm gonna do that again to show you. So here's some pheasant tail fiber. Okay, now I haven't added a wire, but we're going to add a wire. And I just had it in my hand. What the hell happened? Here it is. Because we're going to use the wire after we've wrapped the hackle, but after we've wrapped the fibers. Now, the first wrap of the wire needs to go under the hook, not over the material. So if we're going to wrap the fiber this way and the wire that way, in order for the wire to go under the hook, the wire has to be on my side of the hook. So when we put the wire on, we can tie the wire on, and we want to dress it so that it's going to be on, in this case, my side of the hook, because we're going to wind it in the other direction. And now the wire is there, the hackle is there. I'm calling it hackle, but it's pheasant tail. I'm now winding the pheasant tail, making use of the thread to pack it in. If you had a rotary vise, you can probably do it that way too. I mean, you're not using the rotary feature, but there. Now I've got I've got the pheasant tied down for the body, but it's very fragile. It's unprotected. Now my wire, I wound my hackle this way. So I want to wind my wire this way, the opposite way. This way, as I wind up and over, I'm trapping all, turn by, I'm crossing diagonally all the turns that I put on the pheasant fiber. And in this manner, when I get to the top, I just overlap, tie my thread off, and tie my and because it's wire, I'm not going to cut it. This particular wire happens to be tungsten, so I'm not even going to try to. Some people helicopter the wire off. I'm not going to do that with tungsten easily. So there it is. And now these fibers are protected. That's important. If I'm going, when I tie the fly we're going to tie tonight, I'm going to show you two different ways to tie the hackle on a woolly bugger. Both of them will be counter wrapped. One of them is counter wrapped in one direction. One is in another direction. You'll see why when I do it. Let me see. Is there anything else I want to cover here? I think I'll skip dubbing, cutting stuff off. Okay, I'm going to move on to tying a fly using some of the here today. Let me just tie this off. There. Tie it up. Now when you cut the thread, you can just cut it. You can there's a temptation to use scissors to cut. Eventually you'll learn to just keep a tension on it and just push your scissors to it and it will automatically cut it. And that's very handy because if you've got a bunch of materials together and hackle sticking out and you'll cut hackle. You'll cut anything that's in the path of the scissors. But if you keep tension on one strand and push it, only that strand will cut. So it's a way of protecting other work that you've done that you want to save. So I'm gonna pull that out. All right, now, what we're gonna do is we're going to attempt to tie, let me see if I've got one here. This fly here, I fish a lot for steelhead, and during the drop back season, I've experimented with a lot of different woolly buggers. This particular design is the single most successful woolly bugger design I've ever found during dropback season. Dropback season for steelhead is March, April, and maybe even into May. And I'm not sure why it's so successful. I think there's something about either the size or the coloration or something in this fly that makes it better than anything else I've used. I mean, there's other kinds of flies, but this, I think, represents, to the steelhead, I think it happens to represent a salmon smoke that's in the river, because they're about this size and they have those vertical bar stripes on it that you can see on that tail. And so this is a barred marabou that's in the tail. And so that it's an olive chenille, olive barred marabou tail with a grizzly hackle and a bead. And let me see if I can find the materials. Got to be here somewhere. Find everything but the hook. Oh, here it is. Okay, and I find these to be most successful on 6s and occasionally 8s. Now is hook size. This is a 4X long hook. You could do it with a 3X long. It might be a little short bodied with the bead. This bead I've just inserted on the hook. It just slid up the hook. And we're going to, you see how the bead will wiggle around. Whoops, I'm sorry.
Just gonna say, I can't see anything.
And you see that the bead is on the hook, and the bead is, it doesn't stay put very well. You can see it wiggles around. So a very common method for stabilizing it is to either wrap non-toxic wire. I always use the lead, and you want to choose, generally, you want to choose a wire that's fairly close to the size of the shank of the hook, largely because that's what will tuck in there. And just to fill that in, I'm going to put 3 wraps, 1, 2, 3. And I would normally yank this off, but I don't want to screw up the focus of the camera by yanking real hard. So I'm just going to clip this and try to twist up the rest of it. And this is where I like to use my tweezers, because they do a pretty good job of allowing me to wrap that tail. So now I have this little lead wrap on there, and the lead wrap will fit inside the bead a little bit, and it will stabilize the bead. In order to make everything secure, I'm going to take my bodkin and I'm going to add some glue. I put some glue right there. Maybe put a second little bit right there. And then I'm going to push this all the way up, and then I'm going to use my tweezers to push the lead into the eye of the hook, into the bead, like that. And that should secure, in just a second or two, that should set up, and that should secure things. At this point, I'm going to take my thread, and oh, by the way, when you're buying thread, if you're starting out, be honest with you, almost for everything you're fishing, the most useful colors are brown, olive, and black. So if you were just buying thread and you're not tying mayflies and trying to do some matching of eyes and stuff, most of the time I would just buy those threads, and you're not going to see it. Except if you're tying a head on the fly, which this fly won't have one because it's got a bead. You're not even going to see this thread. So if we were using red thread, you wouldn't see the thread. In this case, I'm going to start the thread right behind the lead, make a couple of wraps up, and then I'm going to gently wind over the lead, come back to it, and just make a little bit of ramp up to the lead. And this is, notice I didn't test this. You see how this thing moves? I got to tighten that. I had a bigger hook in there. Now I got to go back and tighten this correctly. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, now if you hold this tag thread up and you just wind down, it will keep packing the turns of thread right up against the previous one, so you'll have a nice base. Now, why do you need a nice base? Well, the hook shank is slippery, and if you happen to be tying a fly that happens to have some orientation, let's just say, for example, we were doing a fly that had bead chain eyes or dumbbell eyes, so they stick out on both sides. That fly would normally ride upside down. If it's not really secure to the shank, it will spin around and the fly will lose its orientation and not fish well. The other thing too is that you want, when they say wind to the bend of the hook, the place you want to wind to is basically right over where the hook point is. And you're going to need to do that on most streamers. Otherwise, they will be subject to what we call fouling, which is where the, let's see if I got one here, which is where the tail ends up finding a way to wrap itself around the hook like that, and it sticks out sideways and it gets fouled like that. I don't know if you can see that, but by tying it out to the back, you dramatically reduce that possibility. It is possible, but it's very unlikely. And then you might want to spiral wrap up and down a couple of times, largely to make and you might even want to cord it a bit, to basically make a surface that things, when they get tied down to, will stay put. And now you want to start back up here near the leg. And now we're going to move on to putting on the tail.
Put your
And the
camera.
tail, oh, I'm sorry. Nick, you got to tell me when I do that. The tail is going to be marabou. And this is a piece of that marabou, although it's much more than we need. We're not going to tie all of that on there. So you take that and you kind of stroke it out and make the fibers kind of equal. Use your fingernail to kind of tweak them out a bit. This is way more material than we need. It will be more convenient if you wet it. I have a little pot of water here and I'm just stroking it. I'm just stroking it.
You're off camera.
Well, I can't, I just stroked it out. I've got water in it now. And you want that tail hanging off the fly to be just about as long as the shank of the hook. The shank of the hook being measured from basically the front of the bead to the turn. So that's about that much right there, where my fingernail is, except that I want that tied right there. So I transfer that and I take a look at this, and you can see at the front that I would have to cut it off right about here so that I can start tying it in right there. And the reason that I'm tying it behind the lead is because the lead is bigger, the lead wrap is bigger in diameter than the, whoop, I need to unwrap it. The lead is bigger in diameter than the rest of it, and I will end up with a lump. And the fish don't care, but it doesn't look as nice. And then I lift up to make sure I keep it on the top of the hook shank. And I wind all the way back to where I put the base. Get right back down there to opposite that tail. And now I've got and when that dries out, that will be a nice fluffy marabou. And you see, I've avoided having an abrupt diametric change because I use the material to make up the material of the marabou to make up the same diameter that's there with the behind where the lead was. I wind a couple of wraps forward, and we're actually going to tie a variation on a woolly bugger that's really known as a crystal bugger. And people make minor variations on it, give it a whole new name like it was another fly. It's not that big a deal. But you don't want to put a lot of flash in it, but you take a piece of flash and well, probably the most common way to do this is to take it and wrap it around so that it's not an individual end. So I just wrap it around, make it, now I have I have a long strand doubled over. I'm going to bring the 2 strands along the sides. Actually, I don't like that way to do it. I want to separate those strands. Let me just tie it on this way so that one is facing forward and one is facing backwards. That way I can line the ones that are closest to me on the side. And I wind back up and I take the other set and bring them over to the side. Now I have, if you can see, I have 2 of them on one side and 2 of them on the other side. And then I'm just going to cut them about the same length as the tail without cutting the tail. So now I have a couple little flash strands that will mix into the tail on each side, sort of like an extension of a lateral line. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put I'm sorry, do we want to do this yet? Yeah, we're going to put a wire on, and in this case, I'm going to wrap this wire. I'll explain to you why later. I'm going to wrap this wire when I use it in the clockwise direction, looking from the front. So in order for the wire to go against the hook, go under the hook first, I'm going to have to dress this wire so that when I get to the back of the hook, it's on the far side of the hook. So I'll catch the wire in. And now it's way over at the far side of the hook, and I'm just going to put it up here to keep it out of the way. Okay, so I know you can see that. Yeah, the wire's out of the way. Now for the body of the fly, it's a piece of light, medium size rayon chenille. And you take the chenille and you pull the stuff out, and you can see I've exposed the core. And I want to clamp that in. I use the pinch and I get it nice and secure. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap that all the way up. So the next place I'm going to have to tie something down is up at the front of the hook. So I'm winding my thread up to the front of the hook because that's where I'm going to need it next. And this is a case where you could easily do this with a rotary vise, but I will do it manually because I oftentimes do it that way, and you don't need a rotary vise to do it. And I'm simply laying this chenille up the shank of the hook, spiral touching wraps. That's it. Just as it goes right on up. And I will tie it off. 2 wraps ought to do it. A couple of wraps in front, 1 more on top. And then I will, this is a case we actually do have to cut it. And I cut it off, okay? Now, I need to put the hackle on. So I've chosen a piece of hackle material, and I've made it so that you can see that the barbules are about the length of the gap of the hook. And in this particular case, I'm going to look at it, and when you look at it, you'll see that there's a point where the fibers begin to be fluffy. You don't want those. So I got rid of those, and I'm left with this little section, this little stem. And I'm going to tie that stem on the front, but I'm going to tie it on. I've cut it short like so. I'm going to lay it against the hook shank. I'm going to wrap over it. I'm going to tighten it in, 2 wraps. I'm going to fold that butt end back a bit to get another wrap over it to secure it. Okay, and now I'm going to wind that chenille back, winding it in the clockwise fashion. But when I get to the back, it would appear that I no longer have any thread to tie it down with, but I've got the wire. And because I'm winding this in a helix going backward, I can wind this wire in a helix going forward, and that will be it will have the effect of being counter wrapped. The 2 of them will cross each other, and it will protect that hackle, so that the hackles are fragile. But I'm going to make a turn or 2 right here at the front. I'm not doing very well here. It's not obeying. You don't want this hackle to twist. And then I'm just going to wind back through the chenille. And then when you get near the back, you got to be careful of the hook point, because it's going to want to grab it, and it will easily break that hackle. And now I've got the hackle at the back. Now I reach up and I grab that wire that I had saved. Oh, I dropped the hackle. Do you see it all unwind? We'll do it again. Hang on. I'm struggling to get the front of the hackle right. It's like I didn't get it tied on properly. Okay. Now, I said I needed this to go under the hook first, so that it doesn't come in, and then, geez, dropped it again. And I broke the hackle off. Let me retie it on there. Maybe the rotary vise is a good feature for this. But you can do this all by hand. Okay, now when I get here, I take that wire and it's underneath, and I go right over that hackle, and I make a second turn over it, And then I just kind of wind my way back up, going back and forth in order to let the fiber drop down between the hackle fibers, let the wire drop down between the hackle fibers. And when I get to the front, just okay, so then I just clip off my tungsten wire. And then I have to just finish off this part of the fly, which I'll do with a whip finish tool. Now I can just cut the thread and cut off this little extra hackle that's on the back. And one last thing you should do is you should, well, I haven't done it yet. We should put some glue in the and sometimes on a larger fly, I do the bottom as well as the top to let it wick right around there. And then the one thing, I know I didn't do it on this case. I know I didn't make this mistake, but one of the things that's useful to do, sometimes when you're gluing, you fill the eye with cyanoacrylate. And they're very hard to clean out. The best thing I've ever found for cleaning out, you know that little piece of material that we cut off, or a little, I actually saved them. Let me see if I can show it to you. Okay, that little thing, just if you get glue in the eye, just put that right through. The glue sucks into the fibers and it'll clean it beautifully. I actually keep a box of them that I've saved over the years that when I need one, I grab one. They also sometimes get used for atoms as well. So there I have a fly that's perfectly suitable for steelhead fishing. And you can see that hackle has, that marabou has dried out now, and you can see the barring on it. Like I say, I don't know why that fly works so well, but I've never found something that works better than that for drop back steelhead, or when they're dropping back to the lake. So now I'm going to put a fly that's already partially tied in the vise, and I'm going to tie it the other way that you usually see. You notice that on that last one, I tied the big part of the hackle on the front and I wound backwards and then counter wrap towards the front. Most people don't do it that way. That turns out to be really convenient because you get to wrap when you're winding backward from the front to the back, you wind in a clockwise direction, and then from the back to the front in a clockwise direction. If you choose to build it the other way, you then really do have to counter wrap. And the difference then is, let me find my wire. And the difference then when you do it that way is that the wire is going to be wrapped in the other direction. And so that's, in that case, in order to go under the hook first, I know I'm now going to be wrapping it counterclockwise, so I need to put it on this side and come off the back from underneath. The rest of it is pretty much the same. I'm going to take and put the chenille on it the same way. Now, before I put the chenille on, this time I'm going to be putting the feather on. So when I do it this way, I put the feather on at the back. So the feather is on. And then I put the chenille on. I strip it out so that I got the little core there. Wind my chenille. Remember, we're only doing this counter wrapping because the materials that we tied on are very fragile. The material that's fragile here is, of course, the hackle shaft. And now I'm going to wind that hackle from the back to the front. Tie off the hackle at the front. Now, this is an example where I don't want to cut a bunch of hackle fibers, so I'm going to keep the tension on the long hackle, and I'm just going to push without cutting. I'm just going to push right in there. And even though all of these other fibers were in the open part of the scissors, I didn't cut any of them. And now I'm going to counter wrap same manner, but now I'm winding in the other direction. I'm actually winding it in the counterclockwise method. Cut the wire. And whip finish it. And glue. And it's basically the same fly tied two different ways. I personally prefer the first way, but most people tie it the second way. I'm not sure why. But the whole lesson in there is about counter wrapping, just to know when to do it and what to do. And basically you have another copy of the same fly. You have another version of the same fly. So I think with that, I think we'll call it quits for tonight. So any questions?
Brian? I'm going to stop recording.
It's interesting,